Correct, after you do the roll call.
Okay.
Okay, Kaiser also gave me some slides.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
So I have to do a green folder after the meeting.
This meeting is being conducted virtually and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Knox,
Good morning, I'm here.
Mr. Razzo, Mr. Rue,
Present.
Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Oakham. Mr. Oakham is here. Mr. Green, Mr. Moore,
I'm here.
Mr. Kehoe, Chair Robbins.
Here.
Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, AEOs JJ Popowich and Laura Guglielmo, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Legislative Affairs Officer Barry Liu, from Retiree Healthcare, Cassandra Smith, Director, and Kathy Magida, Consultants Stephen Murphy, Debbie Donaldson, Michael Zito from Siegel, Karen Urban, Sean Knoll, Justin Chow, Ramiro Salas, Bob Gonzalez, and Marcelo Fortunato from Kaiser. Trustees, please use the raise your hand Zoom option to be placed in queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute your mics until you are ready to speak, and we may now proceed with the agenda.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Steve to explain where we're going, how we're
Yes,
going to get there.
thank you, Chair Robbins, and good morning, trustees. We need to take an initial action under the Brown Act to establish a proper quorum. On Sunday, February 4th, the governor signed a proclamation declaring a state of emergency in the county of Los Angeles due to the rainstorms. Therefore, we can invoke 54.953E of the Brown Act, which is equivalent to the procedure we followed during COVID, where all trustees can participate in the meeting via teleconference without the need for a physical quorum in the boardroom. This is an urgency matter because the proclamation was issued after the agenda was posted. Therefore, even though this issue is not agendized, the board can take a vote on on the threshold issue of this being an urgency matter that can be, on which a vote can be taken today. So the first item of business would be a motion to find that this is an urgency matter which was not known at the time of the posting of the agenda and that requires the committee's immediate attention. That requires a 2/3 vote.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Yes.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Chair Robbins.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, and having taken that vote, we now need a vote to confirm the emergency and that we'll be proceeding under Government Code Section 54.953E.
I'll move it.
Second.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Chair Robbins.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We've now established a quorum and also the ability of all trustees on the phone to participate in the meeting. Thank you.
We can go ahead and conduct the meeting like we normally would then.
That's correct.
Okay. Item 3 is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 3rd. I need a motion.
Yeah.
So moved.
I'll second it. Are there any corrections or any changes to the minutes?
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Rue,
Yes.
Chair Robbins.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. For an item 4, public comment, do we have anyone from
I
the
have
public?
no requests from the public.
We have no requests from the public. We will go to the item 5, the non-consent. Item 5A is a 2-year extension request for retiree healthcare benefits consulting services. Contract for the period July 1st of 24 to June 30th of 26. I need a motion.
I move it. Oakham.
I'll second. Is there any discussion? Terry?
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Aye.
Chair Robbins?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. We're now on to item 5B. This is non-consent item, continued. The 2024-2025 plan year health insurance rate renewals and benefit changes for the LACERA Retiree Healthcare Benefits Program. You want to just start it out, Cassandra?
I'll start it out.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We're happy to present our 2024-25 premium renewal. But however, since me submitting the memo in your packet today, there's been an additional concession made by Anthem, which now makes our overall 7.6 as opposed to 8.2, which makes also an approximate savings of 19.9 million for the program for the 2024-25 plan year. The Anthem plans now come with approximate increase of 7.9%. Cigna increase overall 5.7. The Cigna Dental Vision increase 2.6. Kaiser's overall rate increase of 9%. The Kaiser out of state 9.3%. Scan increase 7.5. United Health 8.5, which just brings us to the 7.6 overall. We're recommending to continue with the $8 admin fee as we had in the prior year. But one additional request that I am asking approval for is for those individuals that are in the Anthem Blue Cross Prudent Buyer plan, because that particular plan had an increase of 8.9%. I'm recommending that we allow those people that are currently in the Anthem Blue Cross Prudent Buyer plan a temporary waiver to transfer plans, because 20% or 19% is quite a bit of an increase on one check. And so I'm asking to allow those people a one-time
You
temporary
said
waiver.
18.9%?
18.9.
Would you repeat again, Cassandra, what the last minute change with the ABC was?
Yeah. Anthem Blue Cross came with an additional concession of 1.5%. And so it brings their overall increase to 7.9 as opposed to that 9.4.
Okay.
And so the overall
Cassandra?
increase for the entire program is 7.6 at that point. Yes, Mr. Holcomb.
Why is Kaiser, at over 9%? What's he said, 9.1, 9.2?
9% and then 9.3% for the out of state.
If we looked hard at that, because I'm not sure, in the past, we haven't gotten real numbers of what our expenses are with them. And how many,
In anticipation of your question, we have invited Kaiser here to speak with you directly. And so they will be providing a brief presentation to you themselves and are able to answer any of your questions.
okay. Can you repeat, since I'm on the Zoom and the phone and it's not working great, can you repeat that increase? Was that 19%?
For Anthem Blue Cross Prudent Buyer,
Yeah.
it's 18.9, so 19%, yes, for the Prudent Buyer plan.
And what was the reason for that?
Steve?
Trustee Yocum, Steve Murphy. I think the background on the prudent buyer plan is very similar to the plan you have with Cigna, kind of the old Ross Luce plan, which is it's a declining enrollment, mature population. We're not seeing a lot of new entries into that plan design for a myriad of reasons, but we're subject to a lot of fluctuations in claim activity, particularly as we have large claims that will contribute to that. So we may see that those changes year to year fluctuate and become more volatile as we go forward, very similar to what we see on the Cigna plan. So it's part of the issue there, I think. Trustee Robbins, do you have a question?
Yeah, Steve, do you think that's reasonable? I mean, what I've been seeing, and not obviously this large a plan, and I don't know all the medical background, but I haven't seen 19%. I've seen 12, 13, et cetera. Can we get some adjustment on that? Or can we get some reduction in premium for, in the future?
Yeah, actually, I think the team at Anthem and the LACERA staff have worked very hard. We met in over the course of the fourth quarter in preparation. We had a meeting in January in Siegel's offices with all your vendor partners, but specifically with Anthem. Our intent was to try to moderate that increase as best as possible. What we were able to do is, working in partnership with Anthem, was to take a look at more recent claims experience, but that's across all plans, to try to mitigate the overall increase. So they have applied that 1.5% reduction to the prudent buyer. Again, the prudent buyer is just, it's going to be unique. I agree with your perspective, which is annual medical trend probably running anywhere between 9 and 11%. That would be the norm. But that would be for a typical commercial group, maybe an average age of 40 years old for the subscriber. In a prudent buyer plan, that's clearly not the case. We're talking about a retiree population, and so we've got a smaller group, more volatile claim activity, so that is going to be higher than the average. But again, overall, I think that Anthem has been a very good partner on LACERA's behalf and giving us that concession, and that concession was delivered Monday, which is what Cassandra was alluding to. It's not in your packet because it just came to us on Monday. So I think from that vantage point, I think they have done what they can to kind of mitigate that increase. And I think the suggestion Cassandra has of allowing members the opportunity to select another LACERA plan so that they can kind of also look at their choices without the 6-month waiting period, I think is a good plan as well.
I don't see the numbers on here. Cassandra, what's our enrollment in that plan? I was looking to see how many members we had in that plan, and
Prudent buyer has about 801. And if you look at the combination of the other plans, plan 1, 2, and plan 3, which is a Medicare Advantage plan, that's close to 20,000. So it's, again, 800 lives. We're going to have a large claim probably occur every year. So there could be a lot of fluctuation as we move forward. It's just as that enrollment continues to decline because they're not getting new participants, particularly as members are eligible for Medicare enrolling in the supplemental plan. That's kind of what's going to happen. But again,
I don't recommend anybody going into that plan. So, but I think some people think it's similar to the prudent buyer plan that the active sheriffs have, and it's a completely different plan. So that might be partially responsible for the number of people that are in the plan. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the older people that went into that plan for a while, and they're not enrolling in that plan anymore. And there's a good reason why. So,
as we've discussed during the discussions regarding the lifetime maximum benefit, LACERA participants, you might see less than 1% change year to year in terms of electing new plans. So to your point, when someone's enrolled in it, they pretty much align themselves with that plan, whether that is appropriate for them today versus when they may have enrolled in it at that point in time.
Yes. So I'm totally in support of the waiver. My question is, what's the marketing plan for us? Are we going to send a letter to each of those?
We're going to do a targeted mailing to those individuals that are currently in the Anthem Blue Cross Prudent Buyer Plan, letting them know that if they would like to change, that the 6-month waiting period will be waived for them for a period of time.
Thank you.
So even though that premium does not exceed the benchmark, it's still a big increase.
That's a hefty increase at one time for seniors. Typically, as we mentioned, these are the older retirees who may not have the monthly pension amount to help with that. So,
Cassandra, did Steve say there were about 800 in that plan?
correct.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's I second Sean's motion.
Do you want to go to Kaiser now, or?
Yeah, if we could. So as Cassandra had mentioned, the aggregate increase for Kaiser was about 9%. However, the bulk of that increase is associated with a Medicare Advantage plan, Kaiser Permanente Senior Advantage, or KIPSA. That is about almost a 13% increase year over year. That is on the heels of 3 consecutive years of declines. So again, kind of a large swing. Now, there's a lot of work here. So it's in terms of background, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid has instituted a variety of changes to try and equalize kind of the funding for traditional Medicare and the Medicare Advantage plans. So we're trying to rebalance that. As part of that, there are some challenges from a Medicare Advantage provider like Kaiser, like SCAN, United Healthcare, in terms of what future funding may look like. There's anticipations that they may see less funding upfront, but it could be offset by quality bonuses, et cetera, but it's still kind of unknown. I think from our perspective, the challenge we see is that, CalPERS, as an example, is seeing a double-digit increase in their KIPSA rate. It's very similar to what LACERA is. But that being said, both SCAN and United Healthcare, as Cassandra mentioned a moment ago, were able to kind of issue single-digit increases, so somewhere between 6 and 8%. So I think from our vantage point, we're trying to determine, and we've had extensive discussions with Kaiser, what is the perspective of these CMS changes? You know, from a peer perspective, how are they able to kind of come to a change in rates that are single-digit relative to the double-digit increase that Kaiser is looking at? And I think from our perspective, looking at a combination of factors, while our goal is always that your rates be competitive and sustainable, we want to make sure that you're getting the best and appropriate renewals possible. So I think from our vantage point, we had some issues, and again, we've had, I think, discussions over at least the last 13 weeks, to be honest, of trying to kind of make or have some movement. So in lieu of that, we wanted to at least invite Kaiser to provide their perspectives on their renewal process, their budgeting process, et cetera, to give you a little bit more comfort. But more importantly, I think I'll just put it out there. Our thought is that if this rate increase is appropriate, so be it. But if in the situation that we may have paid a premium rate that was too conservatively developed, then we will have overpaid. And I think our biggest question then is, if you feel strongly about the renewal, then what about the future? How does this impact us if we are kind of overpaying for the plan that we have? And I think the last point I'd make is Kaiser historically has been a great partner of both LACERA and the county. Historically has been kind of the high quality, low cost plan. So again, they've offered a lot of benefits. I would say over the past certainly 3 to 5 years, that dynamic has changed. And I think there's more cost pressures on Kaiser. And so we're seeing peers that are coming in at price points comparable to or sometimes below Kaiser. And so that dynamic of kind of being the one and only best value plan is, I think, at risk. As an example, SCAN is actually lower priced now than the Kaiser renewal rate is. So for that context, I just kind of wanted to provide some introductions. Karen Urban and Sean Knoll are here from Kaiser, and pass it over to you, Karen.
Certainly appreciate you allowing us time today on your agenda, inviting us to the board meeting. We certainly can understand how challenging any kind of increase is, and a double digit certainly falls under even more challenging than usual. I think it does reflect some of the challenges that Kaiser has had in the past few years, and in 2022 most specifically. Steve referenced them a bit, but because we are an integrated healthcare system, budget driven, we do set our budget in advance. And the numbers that we have for this year are our current best thinking on what is needed to cover the costs for Medicare Advantage for the plan going forward. But really, we have a presentation deck, but we don't want to throw slides in your face. We'd rather just save the space for if you have specific questions that you'd like us to answer, and we can certainly leave the detailed numbers and deck behind for distribution.
Do you have any?
I think we had planned a 30-minute for a presentation, so we
Okay.
appreciate the presentation.
Sure. We can certainly go to the presentation.
Okay.
All right, next slide. All right, some of what I've mentioned already is that Kaiser is an integrated delivery system. That means that we budget up front for our entire suite of integrated medicine, which would be hospitals, physicians, medical office buildings, pharmacy, nurses, specialty care. All of that has to be budgeted for in advance because it's all part of one holistic program, one holistic delivery care system. So it is a complicated process, certainly, to cover the full scope of all the care that will be provided, having lights on in the facilities, having the facilities open and doors open, having equipment running. That's all covered under the integrated delivery system. It's a little bit different than a claims-based system where they wait for a bill to come in and they pay a bill. And we actually have to anticipate all those costs in advance and budget for those. Next slide. So, what we do to really look at that budget is we look at projecting what our expenses will be for the next year. And what we found over the past, 12 to 24 months following the pandemic is that our costs have increased. Labor costs have increased. Inflation has certainly impacted costs. And that, anticipated declines in utilization following COVID, we haven't seen that. We've seen utilization continue to increase across the program. So all of these things combined together, projecting our costs forward, having to factor in certainly what the mix of CMS reimbursement would be, is a complicated process. And the rates that we put forth are kind of the balancing point for what we see in covering those costs for our delivery system with the reimbursements that we'll get through premium and through CMS. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Thank you so much, Karen. So Sean Knoll, Vice President of Underwriting for Kaiser Permanente. I'm glad to be here today. Wanted to take a couple of minutes just to talk about how we set rates. And this would apply both to the commercial population, the under 65 non-Medicare, as well as it does also impact the Medicare. So there's a little bit of a distinction. It might be bouncing back and forth. So I can stop and rewind the clock if we need to. But how we approach our rate setting is a little bit different than what you might expect from a standard network model. We budget very similar to a hospital system. So at the end of the day, it is important to remind everybody that we're not necessarily operating as a health plan. We are funding a delivery system, which is different than a lot of other carriers. So the way we start that process is we start with a budgeting process and projecting and forecasting the revenue need to fund that delivery system into the future. And then the way we approach the rate setting is we set our rating factors based on prior utilization to hit that revenue target into the future. And so I wanted to just set that as a little bit of context in terms of how we set the rates and our budgeting process, so that it sometimes it comes into play as far as timing.
Do you analyze the success on that? How when you set these rates, or when you go through and you do this budgeting process, do you go back and say how successful were we last year and continue that process going forward? And is this on an annual basis?
It is on an annual basis, and yes, we do go back and look and see their performance, and then in some cases when we're projecting forward, I think the biggest consideration I think that's relevant is when we're setting our revenue for into the future, we do know what our current revenue is looking like, so from current premium revenues, and so the rate increase is really a reflection of what revenues we're collecting in the current period versus the revenues that we're going to be needing into the future. So in some cases, it's not, it's mostly forward-looking, and there isn't as much of a backward-looking process as maybe in other situations.
Some of what you would see as far as our accuracy and performance would be in our financial release that happens once a year. And there's also regulations about medical benefit ratio and medical loss ratio that we need to meet as well. So that's certainly factored in. So those are some ways that you can see the accuracy of our projections and forecasting. And, for the past 20 or so years, we've been pretty close to what our goal is for that. I think 2022 was a year where we had some challenges with that. And we've certainly got a really robust plan in place to bring ourselves back to revenue sufficiency after that 2022 year.
And for our consultants, do we analyze those financial reports?
Yes, we do. And if I could, I'll just take a moment to interject and again, get some additional feedback. So Karen mentioned the fact that kind of the budget process typically almost works a year in advance. So Kaiser is actually trying to work on their 2025 budgeting process today, and that will impact plans that are looking for renewals for 1/1/2025. You are on the back end of that cycle, being a 7/1 calendar year plan. So in 2022, Kaiser reported a net loss of $4.5 billion. Most of that loss was attributable to net loss on investment income. During 2023, that was adjusted or made up, so there was some balancing. But if we look at the financial results for Kaiser through third quarter of this year, there was a $1.1 billion operating surplus. So again, I think if you look at that when they set the budget for 2023, back in 2022, to look at kind of those dire numbers and then get to this point and going, okay, we're at a $1 billion surplus through 3 quarters. which could change. I think Kaiser will report their financials probably at the end of this week. So we'll monitor that and see what that impact is. But I think, again, the issue is it's not an exact science. It's very difficult to land on ahead of the pin, but to have these swings, they still exist. And I think to your point, our experience has been, it's not always perfect. So again, in scenarios where you're paying perhaps more than may be required, we won't know that till after the fact, but Kaiser historically has not operated like other vendors that kind of take that into account more on a client level basis. They're essentially setting rates across the system broadly, well, simple for me, a 10% increase is what they're expecting. If your claims experience is better than the average, you may see a slight decrease. If your experience is worse than the average, you'll see a higher increase. So as an example, for your non-Medicare Advantage group, your claims experience was probably 6% lower than what Kaiser's book of business was. So from that vantage point, we kind of anticipated that we might see a larger reduction for that group. Did not translate during this renewal process, but that was one of the issues that we had. So again, I acknowledge, not easy to kind of do this and do it on a global basis like this, but I think we would be looking for some sort of accommodation or plan to figure out if we've overspent in 1 year, how does that rebalance, or how does LACERA members, how does the county get the same financial value in a subsequent year going through this process? Apparently it was not a question, more of a statement.
Yeah, no, I agree.
My apologies.
That's perfect, and I'm processing it, and I think we're kind of tied into the way that the overall plan is developed rather than that. But I agree. I have all kinds of questions that I ask, like what kind of percentage of membership compared to everybody else, and how does that impact? So why aren't we getting as much of the benefit on the offset? Those type of things. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. That's why I'm making sure that as long as you're part of the conversation and these are things that are being analyzed, then that's what brings me a little bit of comfort. So.
We absolutely share your perspective, and that, again, we're focused on the retiree population here, but we also acknowledge from the active perspective, Kaiser is working in concert with the county and LACERA for that membership over decades of time, because when a member signs up, they're likely there over the duration of their career and retirement. So I think that's something we're trying to broaden this discussion to understand how are we best serving those members, the county and LACERA all at the same time.
Can I ask just a budget question? Do you you set the rate based on your operating budget, or do you also include your, the facilities budget in terms of new infrastructure, new facilities, capital projects, things like that?
Yeah.
Any new systems, for example, that you're going to implement? So how does that factor into the rate setting?
So those are, I would, broadly speaking, I would say the budgeting process on the care delivery side includes all those items that you just mentioned. And then the objective is to say how much of the sort of our commercial premiums that we would need to collect from commercial customers in order to cover those costs. So that's all embedded into the budget, capital planning, capital spending, infrastructure, all of those things are included in our budget. And the revenue that we're collecting is intended to target what we would need in that particular year.
And what other revenue sources do you have besides just the premium collecting?
We've got commercial premiums, we've got government programs, so reimbursements for Medicare, Medicaid, so government programs. And we do have some investment income, but that's really not necessarily considered when we are targeting our budget. We really are looking at operating margins and what our operating expenses are. So we could follow up with more detailed if some of those revenue, but those are the basic ones.
Okay, so investment income is not included as part of an offset?
It is, but my understanding is that the operating margins or our operating expenses is really what we're targeting to cover with our expenses, because our investment income will go up and down, so that's sort of considered separately.
Investment income is often also used, it's reserves in case of emergency. There was a period of time where no premium was coming in. We have about 6 months of reserves to keep salaries paid and lights on and doors open, since delivery of care would be critical, certainly. It also is used to cover retirement and fund pensions, so that's not part of the operating expenses. So that's a lot of how that is used. But the operating budget and the operating margin are really supposed to be part of one whole, and that's separate.
I have a quick question. Do you merge retired people with active people? Is that something that goes on, or are the retired people, are they looked at separately?
I'll take that. So from a rating standpoint, so when we approach the rate development, they are very separate. The under 65 non-Medicare population is analyzed separately. We look at claims experience and set the rates similar to every other commercial population, so to speak. On the over 65 Medicare Advantage plan, that's a community rated product. So that very much is, there's some small specific components in there that would be specific to LACERA, but very few. It's largely a community rate that's sort of taken into consideration on balance what we expect CMS reimbursements would be, plus the costs to cover the Medicare population.
And I do want to clarify that we do have a number of retirees under the age of 65.
That's right. Yeah, it's not an insignificant population. It's fairly big. Did
Thank
that
you.
answer your question, Trustee Holcomb?
Yeah, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, well, I didn't want to cut off if there's any other questions. Okay, well, so this slide, we won't have to spend a lot of time. This was really intended to illustrate, there were some discussions around what is the dynamic of a customer that their renewal cycle is off of January. So Steve mentioned earlier that since LACERA has a July anniversary date, how does that factor into average rate increases as we set them? And there is some fluctuation. So when we set our increases for 25, for example, or 24, there's sort of an ebb and a flow. What this exhibit is intended to illustrate is that there isn't really any inherent advantage or disadvantage based on renewal cycle. So I think really what this is demonstrating, so for 2019, for example, in our rate setting cycle, we are taking into consideration a known increase that would come from customers that would renew throughout the year, but also in that budgeting cycle, we're also anticipating premiums that are coming in from the prior period. So that's what the two, sort of the light gray and the dark gray diagonals are supposed to illustrate. And so in this example for 2019, we had an average increase between 1.5% to 3.5%. So for any customer that was renewing in January, the rates would adjust according to the rate setting. And then as we sort of move throughout the year, despite the fact that only half of the contract period is in 2019, all groups that renew in that time period, they would adjust in the same sort of manner as every other customer. And so it sort of kind of the rate setting cycle is a little bit off cycle or offset from our rate setting cycle. So that's what this is really intended to.
Sean, if I could interject, I think from our perspective, I think as you described it, it's basically once Kaiser determines what the budget is and how the factors are allocated, it's done for the year. So if there's some balancing, everybody gets the same thing. In our experience working with other carriers, as we move along throughout the year, those factors are updated and changed. So again, if people are anticipating, for instance, lower trend rates, that would be incorporated into a renewal as we move forward. For Kaiser, it could be a year delay. So if they assume for 2024, the increase needs to be X, and as they do subsequent clients or they do their 2025 budget, realize we probably don't need as much. That's where we're kind of getting the perspective, are we paying more than we should for 6 months out of the year? Kaiser's perception is everybody gets the same thing. So a 1-1 and a 7-1 basically get the same factors regardless of how things may be evolving in the environment out there.
Yeah, we consistently apply our rating methodology for all customers once the rating methodology is determined. Also because we're a delivery system, changes in salary, budget, wages, costs don't fluctuate as much as they might for a claims-based system that's paying the claims side of the equation rather than paying for the delivery side. I would say those are some of the challenges with adjusting mid-year.
That's right. And there's acknowledgement that it's fundamentally different than like a standard network model because ultimately we are a care delivery system first and foremost.
How far along in your presentation are you right now?
We could definitely speed this up. We were probably about halfway. That was sort of just level setting. We had a couple of pieces that we wanted to call
I had
out.
a couple of comments I wanted to make, but they can wait.
Oh, no,
They can wait until you're done, so.
Trustee Robbins, if I could add,
And now,
our typical presentations during the IBLC meetings, we're not going to do anything on legislative compliance, and the financial experience report is in your packet, but the renewal is the issue of the day, so.
I mean, well, what I really wanted to say is I thought this was going to be worse than it is. As we've been looking at the numbers all year long, I was kind of bracing for bigger overall increases in all of our retiree plans than what we're looking at, given the fact that the active county employees last year had a 15% increase in their Kaiser, and we were way below that. A year ago, I thought that this might be the really bad double-digit year. So I'm relieved that it's not as bad as it is. Having said that, I'm curious if Kaiser is having issues, I think, like we're seeing in the fee-for-service out there with having enough doctors, and because I'm seeing it in Anthem, and we've got, of course, 25,000 retirees or whatever in Kaiser. And I know getting in to see a specialist, having things done, physical therapy, things like this are all things that have really slowed down. And are you hoping that you're going to be able to address that in the coming year?
Certainly, we've had, I acknowledge that we've had challenges with service and access like many other delivery systems. As you work with retirees, you will know that over the course of the pandemic, many people chose to retire, and the same was true for Kaiser. We had about 23% of our clinical delivery staff elected to retire and say, I'm not going to be in the middle of this pandemic in a medical facility. So certainly we have challenges in replacing those most tenured and most experienced personnel. But we are certainly focused on hiring doctors, hiring nurses. We have some partnership agreements with our labor partners to increase staffing across the board. I would say our critical areas that we're focused on are physicians, our nurses, and our mental health care workers. We really are hoping to get quite a few more mental health care workers hired and onboarded as quickly as possible. And we can certainly share more details if there are specific areas that you would be interested in hearing what the hiring has been in that particular area. I know right now we've just hired quite a few people in our Inland Empire delivery system area, which was a particular challenge. So we do look at that, we do track it. We are monitoring it very closely. Everyone in this room is a Kaiser member as well, so we're certainly just as interested as everyone else in making sure that our service and access numbers improve and get better.
Thank you.
All right. Well, maybe we can go through, so the next two slides really were intended to discuss a little bit about sort of the impact of CMS and changes in CMS reimbursements and how that has a very material impact on the over 65 or Medicare Advantage rate increases. And so really I think the punchline on this slide here really is if we look at the rate increases or the levels of reimbursement from CMS and how is that impacting the rate increases. So the red line is representing, so the average rate increase for Kaiser Permanente Senior Advantage. And so as Steve had pointed out earlier, in the past couple of years, in the last 3 years, we were passing along pretty significant decreases to our Medicare Advantage rates. And that was had everything to do with how the CMS reimbursements were flowing. So as CMS is reimbursing and those are healthy, then that has a very material impact on the group rate. And so in the most recent period, in the changes that are happening in CMS, our level of reimbursements are essentially staying flat, but the costs of care and our costs are going up. And so if it's not keeping pace, that has a pretty significant leveraging effect on what the average increase is. And so that's really sort of the basis as to why for 2024, the average rate increase for Medicare Advantage was substantially higher than it was in the past. Had really everything to do with how CMS was reimbursing and the restructuring of those reimbursements. So on the next page, there's just a quick illustration that sort of demonstrates that leveraging effect. That in this particular case, we're illustrating that our total cost of care is going up at about 5%. And if CMS reimbursements were staying flat, or in this example, going up about 0.5%, then the what's remaining, which is a smaller part of the total rate, which is the group rate, it has to increase by about 15% in order for so this is sort of just illustrating how that leveraging effect impacts the rates. And sometimes it's not entirely clear, so we wanted to just bring this to the board's attention. Any questions from anybody? And the next slide really was illustrating, and again, thank you, Steve, for teeing this up earlier and describing this. This slide is really going back to the commercial side, so this is the non-Medicare population. If I can draw your attention to the far right, this illustrates the claims experience for the active population relative to the health plan average. So in this case, it's demonstrating that from a rate of change on the claims, beat the health plan average by about 5 points. And when in the rate, even though the rate increase was a little bit on the higher, I think it was in the 7% range, was still about 5% better than the average, because the average rate increase for our commercial population at the time was about 11.5%. So the dynamic that Steve was talking about earlier did kind of bear out in the data here. And again, these are on paid claims, so there's a little bit more going on underneath it, but this was intended to sort of illustrate how the changes in claims experience track relative to the health plan, and then what that would translate in terms of rate increase. Any questions in this? This would be the conclusion of our prepared remarks.
I'm not hearing anymore. Does that pretty much conclude the report?
Yes, sir.
You want to vote on B, Terry? We have to move this motion.
Before we do that, I just wanted to talk about the administrative fee. So where were we at?
You mean far as?
For overall plan, not Kaiser specific, but.
Yeah, we're recommending that we continue with the $8 fee. As you recall, last year we came to an agreement with the county that we would utilize in excess of reserves that we have to pay down whatever the difference is.
So where are we at with that? Because I mean,
if I remember
$8
correctly, we're still at least 12 or 11 million that we still can go through. But next year, we definitely need to revisit.
Yeah, let's make sure we revisit that, because I think the $8 is, I think we were significantly kind with our sponsor, and I think that we need to reevaluate that.
Yeah, we will certainly do that.
Thank you. So I'll pinch my nose and support the $8 member fee.
So do you want to read the motions, or how do you want to handle this?
I'll make the motion as recommended by staff.
I'll second that. So we're going to approve the 24-25 rates. We're going to approve the administrative fee of $8, and we're going to approve a temporary waiver of the 6-month wait for people in Anthem Blue Cross Prudent Buyer to move into something else. Any other discussion?
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham? He stepped away. Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Chair Robbins?
I'm an aye.
The motion passes unanimously with all trustees present.
And thank you very much for coming down and talking to us.
Thank you for your time today. We really appreciated it.
Thank you, Chair Robbins and trustees. Appreciate it.
As we all wade through the world of healthcare, so. We're on item 6A, Barry, the engagement report for January.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Robbins and trustees. So this month's items of interest for your committee's consideration. The first item, it's some of the top public workforce trends for 2024, sort of a summation of research done by Mission Square Research Institute. So they noted 5 research workforce trends, such as engaging new generation of talent in terms of more outreach about the public sector and things like job security and meaningful work. Also expanding retirement plan auto features. This is more relevant for defined contribution plans, but auto enrollment and auto escalation features to increase participation. Also supporting employees' financial security in terms of financial literacy education. Addressing student loan debt because right now you're seeing Gen Z come into the workforce, and certainly more generations of college students are graduating with more student loan debt. And then lastly, modernizing workforce systems and classifications, such as upgrading technology and streamlining recruitment processes. The next item is interesting, is about using subsidies for retirement plans to fix Social Security. So this is sort of one of those strange bedfellow situations. So Alicia Monell, she's part of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. It's generally a pro sort of pension research organization. And then there's Andrew Biggs, who's with the American Enterprise Institute. Generally, you may have seen his articles that are more on the anti-pension side. But they've recently authored a brief regarding tax deferrals about maybe eliminating or curtailing tax deferrals for 401k plans in order to shore up Social Security. One of the arguments is that the current tax treatment of 401k plans generally benefits high earners, with about 50% of tax expenditures flowing to the top income quintile. When I was reading this, I had a sense of deja vu because this is sort of a similar discussion point a few years ago during the Obama administration, when the president was recommending that college 529 plans be curtailed, because for the most part, those plans go to high-income households with over $200,000. These tax deferrals aren't that constrained, but it's sort of the same argument, and it's would sort of be redistributing the benefits from, say, defined contribution plans, to that other leg of retirement security in terms of Social Security's long-term funding gap. So, certainly an interesting policy argument, but whether there's politically feasible, remains to be seen anytime you talk about sort of a redistributive policy. And the next item is also about 401ks from labor economist Teresa Guladucci. Again, she's traditionally been a very pro-pension advocate, and her latest book talks about sort of failure of 401k plans, and really pointing to the fact that decline of defined contribution plans has been a significant factor in contributing to retirement insecurity by retirees. And she's also arguing that working longer isn't necessarily a viable solution for retirement security, because if you're retired, you shouldn't be working anymore. And then the next item is a study from a Pew Research Center, sort of an opposite take from what I just talked about. This study is looking at the role of older workers and how they're really growing in number and earning higher wages. So for example, older workers would be anyone over 65. Currently, there's about 1 in 5 Americans age 65 and older that are employed in 2023, about 19%, which is double the number of older workers that were employed 35 years ago. And also the wage gap between older and younger workers has been narrowing, and that's due to the fact that older workers are working more. And some of the differences between today's older workers versus the prior decades is that, yes, they're working more hours, but they're also more likely to have a 4-year degree, and they're also more likely to be receiving employer-provided benefits. And some of the factors that contribute to the growing number of older workers is that, yes, they have higher education levels, which increases employment opportunities. They also tend to be healthier, so they can, certainly work longer. The other thing is retirement plans have evolved from pensions to 401k. So pension plans sort of encourage retirement earlier in a specific age, whereas defined contribution plans don't really encourage early retirement. So people, work longer to save more. And also policy changes such as raising the Social Security age, again, sort of encourages people to work longer. And then lastly, the nature of jobs have changed. In the last several decades, we've moved from an industrial work to more knowledge work. So these are less strenuous jobs that older workers are more able to, work in. And then the last item is an interesting item, and one of those things that I get to, when I read about it, it's like, hey, I didn't know that. Sort of like what I reported on in the last few months about plans that don't provide COLAs for employees. So this is regarding the pension plans in New York's pension plans, and apparently by default there are no survivor benefits. They are available, but if you don't elect them properly, a member can leave their spouse without survivor benefits. So what this is trying to do is to change the laws to just provide for a default of 50% joint and survivor annuity. And the big picture view is, about 45 states have public pension plans that do give a default survivor benefit. And also things like requiring consent for the employee to change to a different benefit designation. A couple of other states, again, require the spouse to have notice of any changes in an employee's benefits election. But New York sort of stands alone with two other states, Tennessee and Alabama, that lack a lot of these protections for surviving spouses. So that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions for Barry? Thank you, Barry. Moving on to B, staff activities report.
Yes, in the staff activity report, I reported, as you may have seen in the news or on the newspaper, that Cigna had announced that they would be divesting their Medicare Advantage business to HCSC, which is the Healthcare Service Corporation. What that means to our members, from what I understand at this point, is absolutely nothing. That the benefits will continue to be the same, as well as the cost and all. But Cigna is confident that our members will continue to receive the excellent services that we expect from them, and will keep us abreast should anything change in that arena.
Thank you very much.
One other thing I wanted to report, which I got Monday, it's on your in your CEO report, is the status of the the UC Health with Anthem Blue Cross. That they have come to an agreement. And so our members that are utilizing the UC Health services can now continue on with uninterrupted services. They agreed to extend their current contract through the end of until April 1st, while they work on finalizing the new agreement. And so members can continue to get their in-network services uninterrupted.
Great. Good news.
Good news. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Item C, claims experience, Steve.
Claims experience is included in your packet. You have updated information from Anthem, Cigna. Kaiser's information is through August of 2023. That'll be updated probably in the next cycle. But again, no major observations to share at this point in time.
All right. Thank you very much. Federal legislation.
With a straight face, I'll say there's nothing to report.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. Items for staff review?
We have nothing.
Nothing for staff review. Items for future agendas?
I have nothing.
We have nothing. Good of the order.
I think the
If
only
anyone
item,
wants to speak under good of the order, just raise your hand and we'll call you.
I think the only item for staff review is we're going to revisit the $8 admin fee with the county next year.
If there's nothing for good of the order, we will motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned. You got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
5 minutes different.
You got me time to party.
Recording stopped.